Hi everyone, glad to see you again. So in our last videos we talked about Romanticism and the most important authors of the period, and then the Victorian age or Victorian era and the most representative authors of this period again. Today we are going to start talking about a new movement, a new period. Okay, this period is called Modernism. Modernism is a movement that develops in England in the first half of the 20th century. Especially, it lasts from 1901, which is the year of Queen Victoria's death, to 1945, so the end of the Second World War. The name Modernism, the name of this period, belongs especially to the British tradition, okay, but the same period, some of the aspects of this period are common to many different countries in Europe, with different names, obviously. In Italy we call it decadentismo, in Germany we call it Dekadenz, which means decay, and the decay is actually one of the aspects that this movement has in common, okay, throughout all Europe, we can say, anyway, in different countries. So, in order to understand, okay, the cultural and also the literary elements of this period, we also have to understand the historical and social background. As I always say, literature, art, philosophy, science are all answers to social historical needs or situations. Okay, so we have always to start from the background in order to understand then what social or historical need was moving also art or literature or anything else. So let's start talking about Edward the Seventh. He was Victoria's son, and during his reign England lived a period of peace. It was a very idyllic period, okay, of quiet and peace. But unfortunately, during the reign of George V, okay, Britain had to face strong turmoils and strong unrest. And let's see why. Okay, many things were happening now, and Europe was preparing for a period of terrible changes, because we are going towards the two world wars now. Something good happens anyway, and I'm talking about the suffragette movement. Okay, suffragette movement is found in 1903 by Mrs. Emmeline Pankhurst and her daughter, okay, Christabel, and they are able to gain, okay, the right to vote for women in 1918, so after the end of the First World War, which is a very positive result actually. At the time, Britain was facing, okay, the problem of the Home Rule for Ireland. Okay, Home Rule for Ireland concerned basically independence of Ireland. This is especially important while talking about literature, because we know that actually many important authors are came from Ireland, actually, were Irishmen. We talked about Oscar Wilde, and now we're going to talk about James Joyce. He was Irish, he fought for the Home Rule for Ireland, he was imprisoned because of that, and during his period in prison, in jail, he developed his new idea, his new concept of the anti-hero, okay? He believed, or he started to believe actually, that the man wasn't meant to fight for any ideas, okay? He was probably a anti-hero in life, and so this is the character he wanted to talk about in his literature, in his works, okay? So he is one of the most representative authors, okay, of modernism in England. Now, obviously, all these unrests in Ireland were creating a period of great turmoil, okay, also in all Britain. And then, unfortunately, the First World War, World War I, begins, and it is a period of great disillusionment. So, England came from a period of, anyway, of peace, and war had a an idealistic perception, okay, and there was this idea that fighting for their country, okay, was something epic and absolutely and almost fascinating. Then they had to face the real results of war, the real horrors of war, death, suffering, pain, losses, and also poverty, and that was a great shock. It was a national shock, we can say so. And at the end of the war, there was the Treaty of Versailles, which was something they were very, very unsatisfied of, and it created also disappointment and disillusionment. In the same period, colonies were claiming for independence, and and in this period, the British Commonwealth of Nations was created, and so Britain had a completely different relationship towards colonies, not only as far as economics are concerned or trade or anything, but also the mentality changed, because they somehow believed that they had this sort of a superiority, okay, towards colonies, cultural superiority, religious superiority, and this sort of a task of bring or take civilization and religion to these countries. And now something different happens, okay, and there are these movements, also Pacific movements, like for example Gandhi, okay, and they had to face this new identity of colonies, and they had to rearrange, to reconsider also their position towards them. Then another important element, the rise of totalitarianism. So fascism and communism, they were developing in this period, and we are now going towards the Second World War. And England is now completely disillusioned, Britain is completely disillusioned towards, as far as war is concerned, but anyway, they feel now that they have to fight in order to stop totalitarianism. So this is a completely different perspective from the perspective they had when the First World War started, because now they are completely aware of what is happening, of the horrors of the war. But anyway, they feel this duty, okay, to fight for what they believed in. So all this period, okay, First World War and Second World War, it was also a period of Great Depression as far as economics were concerned. It was a period of unemployment, so great difficulty for people. There was also a positive aspect, which was emancipation of women, but it started from a sad aspect, actually, because obviously many men were fighting, okay, especially during the First World War, and many of them died. So industry was now dying along with them, and so women had to start working, had to start, we can say they had to take the place of their men somehow in order to allow the country, the industry, to stay alive. So they were absolutely important, incredibly important for the country, and the country now was able to recognize their importance, which is actually positive, but for a negative reason, obviously. Then, again, the social system was extremely rigid. Now we are talking about the rigid class system. We had mentioned this system again when we were talking about the Victorian era, the Victorian age, if you prefer. We talked about this strict social pattern, this patriarchal family with a strict moral code, and the middle class. It was with this incredible gap, okay, that divided it from the class of workers. Now this gap, okay, between middle class and workers is becoming wider and wider, okay. The middle class is stronger, okay, it's stronger and stronger, and workers, we will call them proletarians now, okay, they are always they're living in poor conditions, and they are really experiencing a very difficult period, difficult time. Also, the communication system changes, okay, in this period. Radio and propaganda, for example, they use new techniques that come from the so-called roaring 20s, okay, when sensationalism was used, okay, and a new sensationalist way of communicating was used to convey information in order to grant some propaganda, okay, which is also very important, especially between the two wars. Okay, between the two world wars. We have also to remember that the mechanisms that were used in order to develop totalitarianisms were studied, and literature talked about them, especially after the Second World War. We can remember Orwell, for example, in his dystopic novels and science fiction, so 1984 and Animal Farm and so on. We're going to talk about him. Okay, he uses art literature in order to explain these elements, these mechanisms of society, of history that could allow totalitarianisms to become so powerful, so important, and to destroy nations. So this is very interesting, and we're going to talk about that much later, actually, so after the Second World War, so after modernism somehow. So all these aspects obviously have an incredible strong impact on culture, on science, on literature, on anything, on any aspect, okay, of culture, because as I said before, culture is always an answer to a real situation, real life. So first of all, we talked about the horror that was provoked by wars, okay. As a consequence, we have some pacifist movements, okay, in order to prevent this from happening again, or to fight against war in general, okay. There is also a sort of now, okay, we can say that beliefs in general were questioned, okay, and most of the traditional values or religious beliefs were now put into question, and most of the time they were shattered and even eliminated. For example, we can mention here the German philosopher Nietzsche, okay, and one of his most important statements was that God was dead, okay. God is dead is symbolic, obviously. It means that the man now is living in a sort of a mechanism, okay. There is no final aim, there is no final spiritual aim to gain, okay, and the so-called Übermensch has to accept, okay, the cyclic mechanism in which he is living. So, again, something else about philosophy, but also science and medicine. In this period, Sigmund Freud and Jung, they start studying the individual, okay? They start studying psychology. They start talking about psychoanalysis. They start believing and saying that the individual has got something inside, which is the unconscious side, okay, unconsciousness, which is very strong, and it is absolutely true, it is real, okay, and the movement inside the unconscious part of the individual is or can create eventually also some illnesses, some pathologies, some disorders, okay, and there are eventually ways to cure or to treat them anyway. This is very, very interesting. We have talked about the can say some glimpses, okay, some ideas that were concerning the individual and psychological side of the individual when we talked about Stevenson, for example, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, if you remember. We even found out some, we can say, some aspect that he could anticipate, some aspects of Freud's psychoanalysis. We also talked about balance and disbalance, okay, in the individual when we talked about Shakespeare, okay, even. So now we are really talking, analyzing the individual from a very scientific point of view. This is extremely important because now I can say that the subjectivity now, okay, becomes a real element to explore, a real world to explore, okay, and literature will try to do it in a very strong and detailed way. Then again, I have mentioned here three incredible persons: Einstein, okay, Picasso, and Stravinsky. Why? Obviously, they belong to completely different fields and completely different aspects, science and art, music, completely different aspects. Why? Well, they have something in common, and that something, okay, is relativity. Okay, so they all believed that there wasn't just one perspective, just one truth, okay, but different truths, and all these truths were equally right, okay, were equally true, okay. Especially Einstein, okay, with his theory, okay, we know relativity, for the first time told us that even science, which is objectivity, okay, pure objectivity, can have some relativity inside, okay, and then relativity also about art and whatever, okay, harmonies and many other aspects. This is a very, very, very interesting and important side of culture in this period, because this relativity means subjectivity, and subjectivity means that there isn't just one truth, but many different kinds of truths, okay? So, when we talk about literature, we can say that they analyze this relativity starting from the individual, okay? The individual that is living all these aspects, is experiencing, all these aspects, and for this reason he is obviously he lives and he's got a sort of a disorientation, okay? a disintegration of his identity, okay, because the fact that there isn't just one truth, but there are many truths, so there is no truth at all, probably, about the world, about values, about what they have always believed, and about themselves, okay. Then, so this disintegration of identity or disintegration of the ego it is also called like that, and alienation, obviously, because when you lose your points of reference and you lose yourself, you feel obviously alienated. And subjectivity is obviously the most important element, the most important point here. Obviously, in order to talk about these elements, literature, fiction has to change completely as far as the content is concerned and also as far as the style and the language is concerned. Okay, first of all, let's talk about the content. There is a shift, okay, from an external plot to an internal plot. So, what do we mean with this? Okay, we're not talking about actions anymore, we're talking about the individual. Okay, the focus isn't on the action, isn't on what happens outside, but it is on what happens inside. Okay, it is an interior plot. So obviously there is a completely different accent. Okay, the accent is now on the individual, and the author here is trying to okay, to take a picture, okay, of what happens inside the individual. Okay, well, obviously, in order to achieve this, in order to shift completely the point of view, which is now an interior point of view, okay, and life outside, is perceived depending on the mind and the emotional movements of the individual. So, chronological time isn't important anymore. Okay, places aren't important anymore. It isn't important to have an action that continues. Okay, it isn't important to have any kind of continuity somehow. Okay, clarity or anything. It doesn't matter anymore. Because obviously now literature, or anyway, okay, fiction is now just picking, okay, up all the aspects of the human soul, the human mind, human thoughts, human emotions, okay, and they put them together, okay. They don't even try to give a structure to it. Doesn't matter anymore, okay. What matters is that it is a real display of what a human being is inside. So obviously it is extremely related to Freud and Jung's obviously activity, okay. So the focus on the interior side of the human being, of this human being who is extremely now he's lost somehow, okay, he's looking for himself, okay, and for a position in the world outside. So in order to talk about these elements, obviously you have to use specific techniques, okay, which allows you to talk about these new topics. These techniques are especially free association, and free association was also a technique that Freud used in psychoanalysis, okay, because he said that it was important to let, okay, the free association say something about our unconscious side. He asked his patients to eliminate censorship, okay, and just to let thoughts flow, okay, with no censorship or anything, because this was the only way to let the unconscious side come to the surface, and in this case also eventually cure or treat disbalances or problems, okay, of the individual. So free association, which is also a medical, we can say so, sort of a medical technique. Then interior monologue. Obviously, now there isn't a dialogue. It isn't important that the individual is having a relationship with the outside world. It's not important anymore. He has to talk to himself, okay, and the interior monologue is the best way to represent, okay, his own thoughts and his own emotions. Then again, and this is probably the most important, the key word here, which is stream of consciousness. Stream of consciousness is a very important technique of this period, very, very important technique of modernism. It exists also in other literatures, okay, also in Italian literature or German literature. For example, in Italy, we're talking about Pirandello or Svevo. For example, Pirandello with his works Uno, Nessuno, Centomila, Il fu Mattia Pascal, or Svevo with his work Senilità, or maybe in Germany. In German we have, for example, Musil, okay, with his work Der Mann ohne Eigenschaften. And in England, in England, James Joyce, for sure, we mentioned it before, okay, and Virginia Woolf again. Many others, okay, but these are probably the most representative authors. When we talk about James Joyce, we talk especially about the Dubliners and the Ulysses. Ulysses is his masterpiece, is the most experimental work. And talking about Virginia Woolf, we can remember Mrs. Dalloway or To the Lighthouse. Also Jacob's Room. Jacob's Room isn't mentioned so often, but it is very important because it was one of the first works in which a stream of consciousness was used in order to represent the world outside the individual. There is this mother that is inside the bedroom of her son, who's dead in war, and watching the different elements inside the room. She remembers things, she thinks about something, and we start to understand what is happening outside and what happened before through her eyes, through her unconscious side, through her emotions, okay? So it was one of the first ways to use the stream of consciousness, which is absolutely very, very important to remember when we talk about modernism. Now, obviously, free association, interior monologue, stream of consciousness, they obviously require an entirely different language, okay? Language can be the same language we used during the Victorian era or during Romanticism. It can be a very artificial or very elegant language because we don't think that way, okay? When we think, our thoughts, our emotions are broken sometimes, are very simple, they shift from one point to another, past, present and future, maybe all together. So they had this new syntax has to be very dynamic and to represent this way of thinking. And this is why there is also a disintegration of the syntax, and this new syntax is called broken. It's said to be a broken syntax for the reason I've just told. Now, even language, okay, the vocabulary has to be very, very simple, okay, for the same reason. Obviously, when we think, we don't think using extraordinary words, but using very common vocabulary. Again, when we talk, for example, about Joyce, and we talk about the Dubliners, for example, this is very, the language is extremely close to the language of people who lived in Dublin, okay, Dublin was his hometown, okay, and this is also sort of a witness of life, okay, in his city. And talking about the disintegration of syntax, Joyce in the Ulysses, we can say, I said before that the Ulysses was the most experimental work he wrote. He even tried to eliminate punctuation, okay? He used other ways to give a specific rhythm to what he was writing. For example, giving a specific shape to words, okay, a specific shape to words, okay, printed words on the page. like a spiral, for example, or other shapes, in order to let us receive the emotion and the rhythm he wanted to give without using traditional punctuation. So it was something extremely new, absolutely new. We're going to talk about him, about Virginia Woolf, about Eliot. Okay, maybe he represented another aspect of modernism, and we're going to talk about all of them in details. It's all for now. I hope if this is interesting and clear for you. If you have any questions, just ask me or leave a comment below. And please subscribe my channel. And if you find my videos interesting, please share, okay? And as I always say, the more we are, the better we can work together. Thank you very much, and see you soon with the English literature. Goodbye.